How can understanding the relationship between memory and learning help us become more effective teachers? Tracy Tokuhama Espinoza, an education researcher and professor, suggests a simple formula: memory plus attention equals learning. Let's look at the attention component first. This is your brain. Many parts of the brain are involved in modulating attention, including the prefrontal cortex, thalamus, and parietal cortex. You'll see why this is important later. But for now, we'll turn our attention to some particularly effective teachers who will describe their observations about the role attention plays in the classroom.
They need, even in 12th grade, a consistent transition from not class to class. 5-minute passing period and then starting class does not give me attention, but having a transition to get them from up and moving and chatting and doing this to focusing is absolutely integral.
I would do it toward the beginning of the period, not when the bell rings though. I would first, they're in their seats wherever they need to be, and make sure that everybody's with you. I've done whatever I'm going to do at the beginning to really capture their attention, told them what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be learning, and then I would give it to them just, within a few minutes after the beginning of the class period.
To hold their attention was my constant goal, and that meant noticing everyone, what everyone was doing, and using the gentle reprimands and being excited over good stuff. I was very, very alert. And from adolescents' faces, they can sit there thinking they have a blank look on their face, but more shows, and the like what the foot was doing or what the pencil was doing. There are many, many clues. At any given time, I should expect at least a third to have tuned out momentarily. But sometimes I would pause and I would say a sentence and then I'd ask them to repeat that back just to cause that fact to sink in. Well, at that moment, then all of a sudden they're all doing this one thing. So it is a way to bring them back.
It's important to split up. If I have things to communicate, split it up with opportunities for them to talk to each other and to hear each other, especially. So I try, even in classes where I know I'm talking a lot, to at least every 5 or 10 minutes, give them an opportunity to talk to each other for a couple minutes.
I aimed toward wanting to lead with something that was interesting, something powerful or important or quirky. At the end of something, now silence and write down something you want to remember.
I concluded class by having the students go back to talk again about what we had set out to learn during that lesson and set out to accomplish during that class period, and to kind of summarize for themselves what they had learned.
Of course, there's much more to be said about attention, but it's time to move on to the second part of our learning formula: memory. First, you need to know that there are two different types of memory: declarative or explicit memory, and non-declarative or implicit memory. Non-declarative memory includes motor skills, muscle memory, reflexes, and the like. Declarative memory can be divided into two further categories. Episodic memory is comprised of things that happen to us in our lives and usually is associated with emotions. Semantic memory is comprised of facts and data. When considering formal school learning, it's most useful to focus on declarative memory. When an event occurs, someone shares an interesting fact, you look at a painting, you smell freshly baked cookies. That sensory input causes neurons to fire in sequence. The more those neurons fire in the exact same sequence, the stronger and faster their connection becomes until they eventually form a cohesive neural network. This process is known as encoding and is how the brain turns sensory input into a working memory. Most of the activity of working memory takes place in the prefrontal cortex. In order for memories to continue from working memory into long-term storage, they must undergo a second process, memory consolidation. During memory consolidation, the amygdala and the hippocampus ascribe sense and meaning to the new learning, making connections to emotions, past experiences, and previous learning. As more connections are made and the learning is organized, the neural networks grow stronger and more expansive, becoming part of long-term memory. When considering the process of memory consolidation, my mind immediately turned to the sorts of multisensory approaches I've successfully applied in my own learning and teaching. I've long understood that the more areas of the brain you can get to light up while rehearsing a concept, the better it will be learned and remembered. After all, more neural connections create a bigger, stronger network for that memory, making it much easier to find and retrieve it from long-term storage. So I asked my interviewees how they helped students to create and reinforce those neural connections, expecting to hear about multisensory strategies like kinesthetic vocabulary. Here's what they had to say.
Yeah, I think it was high, low, whisper.
Okay.
And then you told us that the last quarter of our senior year we could also
Yeah.
shout.
Right, yeah?
Yes. So why did you do that?
To get your attention, to make those neural connections in your brain, to not be boring. My oldest daughter, ASD music teacher, has said that music causes the brain to light up. Just listening to music, and when you participate in music, when you sing out loud, the whole brain lights up. And that is thrilling. And it made me wish I had you guys sing little ditties here and there, to get the whole brain lighting up over the comma.
I just really tried to have them use as many different parts of their brain as they could. I had them, they would hear me talking about it with their fellow students. There would be diagrams that I would have them look at and explain back to me so that they're visually processing it and then having to explain it orally. I would do kinesthetic kinds of things where they were modeling the development of an organism by taking some Play-Doh and breaking it into 2 balls and 4 balls, and then it folds this way and that way, and to have to explain it while they're doing it with various chemical pathways. I had them put the molecular diagrams in the correct order, so they had to manipulate it with their hands. So I just tried to do as many different, I had them listen.
Fortunately for me, and all of you watching, these teachers were not constrained by my extremely leading interview question. They emphasized other kinds of connections.
The question that you're asking is, how do you help students connect to a new abstraction, a new set of essential characteristics for a new concept? As we mentioned earlier, memories, even of very abstract concepts, tend to be encoded physically. Giving them reference points, making sure that if I'm describing something abstract, they have one, like the relevant example, the one thing that I'm always going to use as the example of this to associate with that is familiar. But also that I'm giving them reference points for new concepts that are familiar to them. We most recently read with them The Omnivore's Dilemma, and that was great because they, as Vermonters, about 30% of my class has parents who work in agriculture and can talk about it. And they generated their own for all things that I'm trying to get them to encode, starting with an example that is a familiar reference point would be the most common strategy.
With Lord of the Flies, when that was one of the books students could choose to do a book report on, I sometimes said, imagine being on an island with other kids and nothing else around. How do you survive?
Prompting a question in their minds to pique their curiosity was a common technique that I used, and that's probably what I tried to do most often, to have them help me perform a demonstration that caused them to question why did that happen? What's the explanation for that? Or I would sometimes do something like present some news that was in the newspaper that related to the topic at hand that would be something really relevant to current events, and making them sort of stop and pay attention and think, oh, this is new information. How does this fit with what I believe and what I know already? I think something else that really helps it stick with students is when they have to grapple with it. And in that way, for me, doing labs where, there's this concept, but now you have to do a lab and you have to figure it out. You have to use other numbers. You have to solve problems based upon the knowledge that you have, and it takes it to another level.
You see, when helping students make connections, strengthen synapses, and build neural networks, effective teachers are more concerned with connecting to big ideas and emotions and personal experiences than they are concerned with strategies for lighting up the brain. It turns out that these teachers have the right idea. In fact, connecting content to big ideas and emotions does more to light up the brain than fun songs, kinesthetic vocabulary, or mnemonic devices. Extensive research by neuroscientist Mary Helen Imordino Yang and her team at USC, well, I'll let her explain in her own words. In this research, individuals watched videos depicting true stories while undergoing fMRI scanning. When participants reported finding the story emotionally meaningful and personally relevant, the orange areas in the brain images above showed coordinated activation. The way individuals make meaning is cognitive and emotional at once, like a good story. And deep, meaningful thinking actually taps into basic survival processes, in essence, making the thinker feel more alive, like their work is personal and like what they think and do matters.
If attention and memory are both essential to learning, as teachers, we must do our best to engage our students' whole brains, those parts responsible for attention, for emotion, for expansive ideas, and for concrete information. Neuroscience can give us tools for doing this more effectively, but before we get too caught up in the minutiae, let's allow Felix one last word.
Not that I'm a behaviorist, but I'm a behaviorist in an educational sense, where I'm a lot more interested in whether a certain practice is good educational practice and gets results than whether or not it's based in effective neuroscience.
It's true that we are secondary teachers by vocation, not neuroscientists, and we should approach brain-based education recommendations with humility and healthy skepticism. These are not solutions for our problems, nor formulas for success. Perhaps it is best to follow the example of the teachers profiled in this informal study from UPenn. Neuroscience can reinforce our sense of education as a profession concerned with shaping students' brain development. And, most importantly, we can use neuroscience to better understand and teach our students.